This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well, welcome to the Friday night finish line. You know, we've got the Altar of Bard, we got the Friday night finish line, and Tuesday Nuggets. And Gary, how are you today?
I'm great, Mark. How are you?
It could not be better. It's been a great week. You've had a quite the busy week, and producing Brian and Gina's new episode. Another one dropped today.
Absolutely, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in downtown LA. It's one thing to talk about it; it's another thing to live it every single day, as you have been for many years.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we had a interesting week here in Fentanyl Alley, aka Lebanon Alley, which used to be Lebanon Alley. There, were you there that day, Gary, when they closed the alley and there's some apparently rather high on something, decided it would be a good idea to grab an officer's gun after getting a little Chick-fil-A?
I was there that day. I actually did not learn about the events of that day until a day or two later when Tony told me all about it. But I was definitely there that day and walked to my car blissfully unaware that just a scant 30 yards away that was going down. So
yeah, you walked in the car. I could not get out because we were blocked off. But I saw something that gave me some hope today as I was leaving the office. You know, we often talk about the kind of the community of unhoused that surrounds and I say unhoused purposely to just set off some of the people who watch, but the community that is downtown LA. And interestingly, there was a young man who had came to the building today, knocked very politely and engaged with security and asked them to call the paramedics because he wanted a 5150 declared on himself, and was very recognized the fact that he was going into or spinning off, if you will, however you want to characterize it. He wasn't extremely articulate, but was self-conscious enough to understand that he needed help and called for it. And as I left, the paramedics had arrived and were taking him away. And I was reminded kind of the that special hit squad, if you will, lack of a better term, that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, has, that I think has been very effective. I'm sure we'll get some pushback there, but he sends basically one representative of police, a social worker, ambulance driver generally, and then you get a choice of where you want to go.
Right.
And people say, well, that's not very kind, but I think our friend of the show and will be on the show again very soon, Drew would say, you're not doing anybody any favors by letting them spin out of control. One of the things that Drew had said the other day when we were talking with him that really was a insight to me, you always wonder, at least I do, the amount of fury and anger that you see when the people are in the throes of this. And Drew's kind of very distilling it down explanation, and I don't want to do it an injustice, but kind of that recognition that the frustration that happens when you go into these episodes and the anger that you feel because of you just can't escape it or can't get your arms around it, or your brain around it, was very interesting to me because I had never really thought of it in that way until we discussed it with him.
Yeah, I agree. And to put a finer point on it, very soon will be our very next episode that Drew will be joining us again. So there's a little tease for anyone who is considering missing the Sunday Altar of Bard. Don't do that because Dr. Drew will be back. But yeah, to your point, I would say the part that sticks out to me a little bit and always has when Drew talks about this, and Drew talks about it like a broken record. So I'm not saying anything he hasn't said 100 times, but it's not only the anger that they feel when they're in the throes of it, but once they're out, the anger that they have at people who would call themselves advocates, saying, how could you let me do that? Like, how could you let me live outside my mind and outside of, the sanity that I need to take care of myself? Like, now that I'm out of it, I'm looking at what was happening, and you say you're advocating for me and you're trying to protect my rights, but I don't want to be in that state. And God, no one wants to be in that state. And how could you have let me do that?
It reminds me of a argument that two brothers I know had over when their father was kind of in a debilitated state. And the one brother just wanted to have an event to celebrate the father, whatever the occasion was, celebratory occasion. The other brother was adamant against it, channeling, he thought, the father's dignity and the fact that he would not have wanted to be wheeled around like a circus animal, so to speak. And then the other brother making an equally, I think, valid point that no, this is kind of his last days, his last chapter. This is the time for him to see and kind of enjoy and reminisce, so to speak, and as much as you can when your mind is devolved and disintegrating.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting. I mean, the mental health and the mind, and my good friend Mia's at a horrific event this week that TMZ reported on, much to her chagrin, with her daughter Paris, who I adore, and it's just it hit mental health issues hit so close to home for so many people, and we have such a kind of a bizarre dance that we do with mental health. And I was thinking about that for the show with Lori Vallow and the trial that's going on right now in Idaho, and Idaho claiming or proudly boasting that they don't have a mental health defense, if you will, or an insanity defense. But in actuality, I was talking with Alex Kazarian today, and we were looking at that, and they kind of do. It's just they've kind of changed the prism on it, and you can't, because I kept saying I don't understand how this is possible. People keep saying there's no mental health or there isn't any insanity defense. I said the whole idea, basically, a crime is actus reus, which means you're the Latin for the action, and mens rea, which is the mental state. And so if you don't have the mental state, you can't commit the crime. It's one of I used to call it the idiot defense. I think it was called Section 17 of the Penal Code, where idiots, by definition, not in the pejorative sense, but an idiot in the traditional sense, could not commit a crime because they didn't have the capacity. And so if you don't have the capacity or the mental state, you can't commit the crime. It's not to excuse the crime. It's just we're saying ab initio, there is no crime.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And, that's been discussed quite a bit when it comes to the Idaho thing. And, I believe I saw you speaking with Chris Cuomo, and somebody else who was on the panel was speculating about at what point does her team, regardless of her wishes, just have to kind of throw their arms up and go, look, we'll put her on the stand and let her, put herself, in that category. But that's got to come up at some point.
Well, there's a couple of interesting points around it, and one of the reasons I often am attracted to these kinds of tabloidy true crime cases is that they do at least showcase certain issues, and this one is mental health. Now, mind you, she has a history, Vallow, who was part of this, what they're calling the doomsday cult, and is charged with killing her kids. And, can you think of a more horrific crime than a mother killing her kids? No. And God forbid that anybody is ever anywhere close to that. But she was in and out of competency, and competency is different than insanity, in that competency is that you cannot assist your lawyer and don't understand basically what is happening and the nature of the proceedings, and to be able to assist your lawyer. And she's drifted out of competency. And I've explained a number of times, and I've had this in countless cases, I can't tell you how many times, how when you have a person who has the mental health challenges, when you put them in the county jail system, when they first get arrested, they're in the county jail system. The county jail, even though, as I've said often, the last four sheriffs have all described the LA County Jail as basically the biggest mental health institution in the world. Even though the sheriff recognizes that, they really don't have the capabilities nor the training to deal with the mental health, to medicate or anything else. So if you have a client who has those issues of competency, you declare a doubt in California to 1368 or 1369, and you then have them evaluated. You go over to mental health court, and they go out to Atascadero or one of the mental health facilities, and they get stabilized, right? And then they regain their competency. And then the doctors there, rightfully so, say, okay, the person, we've medicated them, we've kind of stabilized them. They're ready now to go face the consequences. Well, the problem is they get then returned to county jail where they disintegrate once again, and you're in this endless cycle or circle. Right. And that I had a case that lasted for 10 years on a murder case where that just kept happening, and you could not get anybody to try to. The system just does not. I guess it understands it, but the system is not built to deal with that.
Right. Yeah. And that case, for anyone who's not following it, and, we haven't covered it a ton here, but I'm sure we will as time goes on, is, God, it's particularly disturbing because, one of her best friends recently went on the stand and brought with her a audio recording, basically where she's calling Vallow out and saying, you told the cops that one of your kids was with me. Why would you do that? And, to hear this woman explain that, well, I just did it because I needed to tell them something, and I know where the kids are, and they're happy and they're safe and they couldn't be doing better. When in reality, the facts of the case have shown that at that point the children were dead. And that's just, gosh, it's a disturbing.
Well, you as a parent of a young child,
yeah,
that just
you've always told me that.
I've said before you had children, and I've said it well before you were married, that it's a different league. So
yeah,
once you have the kids, and when jurors hear a tape, and if they believe, and there's pretty compelling evidence to believe this, that the kids were already dead and buried, and she's talking in a matter-of-fact tone about, no, they're safe and they're fine,
they're happy.
And if you accept those two things, it's devastating. And by all accounts, people this isn't being televised, but people in the courtroom said that the reactions of the jurors were stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to be honest. Look, as much as I would hope that I'd be able to remain a good public servant, I just sitting here without any actual consequences, I know that would just be the end for me. I would just tune out. It's like, okay, well, if I believe that, and if I am listening to that audio tape, that I've heard some of, and you can find on the internet if you're interested. it is, she's speaking very calmly about a subject that is just unfathomable. I don't know. Obviously
So then there's the one of the arguments that I was getting into discussions was, well, she doesn't want to have a mental defense. It's against what she wants. Kind of that Ted Kaczynski, for those who don't remember, the Unabomber was adamant and got into and litigated the whole idea of his lawyers trying to enter into any kind of a mental health defense for the Unabomber because he believed that diminished him. And so there was that tension between the lawyers and the client. And this is always one of it is a hallmark or a signature. And I want to talk to Drew about this also and talk about this phenomena of where the client is so entrenched in the delusion, if you will, that they don't even want to characterize it as a delusion. And they get angry if you confront them with that.
Yeah.
That to me is a ethical conundrum for the lawyer, number one. And number two, then I've also noticed, one of the things I've noticed, and maybe you can pose or remind me to talk to Drew about it. I've also noticed that when people get that kind of wrapped up in it, and they are, there's that tension that exists between the lawyer and themselves when they do not want to kind of face the appraisal of a third party who is there supposedly advocating for them, that they then decompensate and they then disintegrate. And that's when you get out of the NGI, not guilty by reason of insanity, and that doesn't apply in the Vallow case, but you get into what may apply, which is the competency issue.
Yeah. I think we should definitely talk to Drew about that, and I've made a note here so we will not forget. What do you see as the rest of that case? How much longer do you think the Vallow case goes before it heads to a jury? And I won't ask you to speculate on the jury's verdict, but how much longer of that case do you think we have?
Well, there's weeks at least, but I still, if I'm handicapping something, just given what I've seen so far, it would surprise me. And actually, it would counsel other conclusions, and I'll wait and I won't speculate. If there isn't a competency issue, if she doesn't at some point, this week there was a sudden recess. I had immediately thought, oh my God, there we go. She's not coming out of her cell, or they're going to have to order an extraction. No, in fact, it turned out that it was a sudden death in one of the prosecutor's families, or a sudden illness, and not what I had expected. But I still have this deep-seated suspicion that may be where we're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you want to change gears a little bit here?
I would like to change gears. Do we have a friend of the show waiting to come in?
We sure don't, but we have a topic that I would like to talk about because Gina Grad, our own Gina Grad from over at the LA Magazine YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/Los Angeles Magazine Videos, if you care to go over there and check it out and give a subscribe. She has been highlighting a story that's been in the news today about a particular state in our nation that has decided they are going to ban TikTok. And they are not just banning TikTok, they are making it illegal for app stores, of which there are several, two prominent ones, but there are more than just the two. It is illegal in their state, based on this new law, for those app stores to offer the ability to download the app. This seems like it's going to have...
That has to get challenged, and I'm surprised it hasn't been already.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's breaking in the past few hours, so it's possible that someone is... not unlike you have been known to do, hold up in their home, editing their lawsuit and just getting ready to deliver it. But it's interesting because, we've also got this Restrict Act that is so-called, the TikTok legislation that doesn't mention TikTok at all. Now we've got Montana doing their thing. What do you see unfolding? The CEO recently testified in front of Congress, and to mixed reviews, certainly. His defense was, we're a Chinese company and we're it's being alleged that we're collecting data, but is anyone saying that these other conglomerates, these other social media conglomerates that might not be China based, but no one's saying that they're not doing the same thing. So where do we draw that line?
It's a variation on, SODI defense is some other guy did it. The OD defense is everybody's doing it. So that's, I don't know that that's going to fly. I just think that there's real problems with the patchwork because you're dealing with a federal, presumably, regulation. And for states to start regulating within is generally going to run afoul of the various clauses, not exclusively the Interstate Commerce Clause and others that it would be based on, would be my guess. And I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody run in and get a restraining order from that being done.
Yeah, and call me jaded by some of the conversations that we've had in various murder cases that we've covered over the years. But how exactly does that work if you happen to be on the border of Montana and another state? And how do you regulate which cell tower your phone is picking up and whether or not that app is available? Even if you're physically in the state, if your phone is connecting to a cell tower that is outside the state, then, how exactly do you police that? And then how are you supposed to enforce it as well?
Exactly right. And then that's precisely why you can't have this patchwork of laws or different rules for state by state for precisely the reason you just articulated.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one's one we're going to keep an eye on for sure. I really enjoyed, to harken back to anyone who didn't hear our episode a few days ago with Dr. Drew. That was a really interesting conversation on California SB 43. Where, for anyone who didn't hear that, there's legislation that's finally coming out of the Democratic camp in California that is aiming to give people tools to expand the definition of gravely disabled. Gravely disabled, right.
Right. And, that's been a topic of conversation for many years. I'm sitting here a mile away from the Lanterman Auditorium, named after Frank Lanterman, who was the author, along with Senator Petrus, of the Lanterman-Petrus Act, which originally was designed for the ability that you couldn't hold anybody incommunicado against their will. What has ended up happening now is, and as Drew often mentions, that the Lanterman passed away thinking that it had been perverted, if you will, his act. This SB 43, right?
I believe so, yes.
Has been proposed in California, and we'll table it until Sunday and talk about it at that point. I also, I think on Sunday, want to talk to Drew about another medical legal controversy, which is the abortion drug, which has made its way from the district court, where there was just one district court judge. So there is also the issue of forum shopping, who issued a restraining order, which then went to the Fifth Circuit, which, a lot of people said stayed it, but only stayed a portion of it. And then it went to the Supreme Court. The Department of Justice took it there. Justice Alito pressed pause, didn't.
Just until Wednesday, right? I've been reading.
So we will be talking about it on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's an interesting interplay between the medical and legal again, and that's why it's so opportune that we've got Drew on, and I look forward to it then, Gary.
Yeah, so do I absolutely do as well. And one more thing that we didn't touch on for SB 43 that I want to talk to Drew about is, aside from expanding the definition of gravely disabled, it also removes a hearsay component from allowing in a situation where they're trying to determine the competency of someone. The SB 43 would allow for experts such as Drew to weigh in and give their opinions on particular patients who are potentially struggling and need to get help without it being hearsay. Apparently, up until now, these experts, even if they have Drew's experience and kind of expertise in these addiction things, if they were not there to see exactly what was happening, then they cannot weigh in, and that apparently is something they're aiming to change. So I'd be interested to hear Drew's thoughts.
I'll give you coming attraction on that too. There's going to be a challenge to the law if it passes on because it runs headlong into another recent California Supreme Court case. So it's another tease, if you will, Gary. And I look forward to seeing you at the altar Bard on Sunday.
All right. Legal and medical coming at us in full force. I can't wait. Mark, thank you so much for your time on a Friday evening. You enjoy your finish line.
Oh, I am. I've arrived at the finish line. Thank you. Thanks to our sponsors, Alex and Ani, and to LA Mag. I appreciate it. And Gary, I'll see you on Sunday.
I'll see you then, Mark. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.